no one can tell me what they mean. But it looks like I repeated the same verses there. So. And the shrill head swallowed the 7 healthy heads and told them to dreams. No one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that come up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I have described it. For God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterward, there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God and he will soon make them happen. Okay? I don't think anyone in here is actually old enough to have lived through the Depression of the 30s. No, he's not quite. He's not quite.
Not even me, John.
That's right. See, I knew that, brother. I was.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. My daddy. So my parents lived through the Depression. I am one who was born late to parents of the greatest generation. So my mom and dad had strong memories of the Depression. Now, both my mom and dad were born in the 20s. My dad was born in the mid-20s, 1920s. So he doesn't really remember, or didn't really remember, the roaring 20s, as it were. But he had clear memory of the Depression-era years. And there were families that had it so bad that there was not even a glimmer of memory about the good years. Okay? And so that's what we're seeing. But even then, our depression did not hold a candle to what Egypt is about to go through. Okay? And that's what we're going to talk about. So these verses are pretty self-explanatory. It's Joseph has explained what the dreams mean. They're very disturbing dreams. But Joseph has explained what they mean. But what we see in these verses is, Joseph is in prison and Pharaoh calls for him. Now remember, it's been 2 years since the butler and the baker. Okay? It's been a total of 13 years now since Joseph was sold. No. Drafted. It's been a total of 13 years since Joseph left home. Okay? And so now he's being called up to Pharaoh. So he gets cleaned up. I find it interesting here that he shaves. Okay? It actually mentions that in the scripture. He shaves and put on clothes. All right? This is not a custom of the Hebrews. Right? They are wilderness people. Right? Kind of a little nomadic. Living out in the open, they don't live in the desert, but they live out in the open. And so to have a full beard and hair to cover your head protected you from exposure to the sun, the wind, that kind of thing, right? But the Egyptians, on the other hand, they shaved. They shaved their whole heads, right? You've seen the pictures, the hieroglyphs, right? Nobody has hair in an Egyptian deal, right? Now they've got the little painted goatee, right? That was fake, right? It was cloth, right? It was ceremonial, and so we see that Joseph, as he comes out of the prison, is prepared for his audience with Pharaoh in the way Egyptians are prepared, right? In the custom of that society. His head is shaved, his face is shaved, and his clothes are changed, right? So he's probably in the same clothes, if they haven't rotted off his body, that he was put into prison in. And if they did, if those clothes are gone, he certainly didn't get new clothes, or he didn't get the best clothes, right? But now he's dressed up in a fancy suit, right? So he puts on instead of ratty old jeans that have holes all in them, well, you know, like the young people wear to church, right? Those jeans. Instead of that kind of stuff, he's put into slacks. Give him a tie and a coat, right? Because he's going to stand before the king. He's going into the presence of the king. Now, he's not given the best clothes, but he's given clothes that will allow him to be presented before the king. Okay? He's cleaned up and prepared. Now, in the space of a few minutes, an hour, maybe two, Joseph comes from the lowest of places in Egyptian society to stand in the highest of places in just the space of a few minutes. When God starts to move in our lives, the speed at which He moves is awe-inspiring. I mean, it's not like, oh, you know, it took Him 30 years. If God is moving, now it might be 30 years for you if you know you're moving or you're working and you're saving money, like. But when God says, "I've got a plan for you, I've got a job for you," when it's right, when the time is right, it all happens. Bang, 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 bang. Right? You see it. It's awe-inspiring. And so we see that just in the space of a few minutes, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, Joseph comes out of a dungeon where he doesn't get to see the light of day, and now he stands before Pharaoh. He comes out of his prison clothes, right? And he's now dressed in a nice suit, a business suit, if you will, right? He's been cleaned up, he's shaved. And you just think about it, you know, they didn't shave back then much different than we do today. So that meant he was washed, right? He had soap applied, and they took a blade to him, cut off his hair. Right? Now they didn't have safety razors. I'll tell you that, but still. All right. So therefore, hang on a minute. Where did he go? So it's the lowest of places. Okay. So we see him interpreting these dreams for Pharaoh, right? We continue. Let's continue. Now he's interpreted the dreams. He said, "This is what it means." And now we see that Joseph does something that is unexpected. Okay? The king did not ask him what he thought. The king said, "What do my dreams mean?" Okay? But Joseph here has such a humble spirit. Joseph has such an unassuming demeanor. Joseph has such a servant's heart that he interprets the dreams and he then begins to advise Pharaoh. And he does so in such a manner that Pharaoh, and we'll see this in a minute, I'm just giving you a preamble. He does so in such a manner that Pharaoh does not feel threatened. Does not feel like he's being told what to do. Okay? And this really shows the hand of God on Joseph. So it says, "Therefore," this Joseph still speaking, "Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. The Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5, that's 20%, 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead, bring it into Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away. Guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. Okay? For those of you who study history, there have been many countries that have completely collapsed because of depression. Right? Now, it can be financial, right? Like, for instance, in America, the Depression of the 30s, which we talked about a little bit earlier, that was a depression born of financial mismanagements. Okay? But you can have a depression that occurs because there's no food, right? If there's no food, or there's some segment of the economy, cattle raising, farming, something like that suddenly disappears. You don't have it. And then prices go up. Nobody can afford anything, and the whole thing collapses, right? How many of y'all been keeping up with the price of eggs? Right? Okay. Now that's just an itty bitty teeny tiny part. But imagine if what was going on with the price of eggs was happening to all the food.
I was told today that they're going to have to start importing the eggs.
They're going to start importing them to try to bring the prices down, but they don't have to. Now, part of that, just to chase that rabbit down the trail just a little bit further.
How is importing eggs going to bring the price down?
Because you have more eggs.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to go back down to where we're accustomed to it being, but it'll come down off of where it's at now. At least that's the theory. But part of the problem they're starting to realize now is, so the problem is bird flu, avian flu, right? And so what happens when the bird catches the bird flu is the bird's little sinuses plug up, and when the sinuses plug up, they go to sneeze and they blow their brains out. No, I'm teasing. That's not.
No.
That's not what happened.
They can still run around like a chicken.
Well, yeah. Even though their heads are blown off, they still run around, but they can't lay eggs.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, so what happens is the it's not the FFA, the FDA. Thank you. Right. They recommend to chicken farmers, right? If one bird in your flock gets the flu, you got to destroy them all. And they were doing that. Well, now some of the smarter brains are starting to speak up, and they're going, what are you doing? No, you separate that bird, right? Because if it lives, guess what? It has an immunity. And the avian flu only kills a percentage, and it's kind of a high percentage, but it only kills a percentage of the flock. And so if that bird survives, you separate it. If that bird survives, you put it back in the flock. And what you're doing is you're breeding in immunity to the flock, right? So, but guess what? That takes time. That takes time. And so in the meantime, eggs go high. Now, back to our deal here. So when one entire segment, such as farming, right, suddenly collapses, I mean, think about today, think about what would happen if you went to the market and the shelves were bare. There was no food.
That's the case for every
Sometimes
person.
it is.
Well, now, but see, and you're right. We have a run on toilet paper every time there's a hurricane. But what do we know? We know that
Manufacturing still occurring somewhere.
that's right. So they're going to have food next week. There's going to be a truck in a couple of days. So now let's play the game, right? There's no food. There's not going to be a truck in a couple of days. What do you think is going to happen to society at large?
They were based on agricultural 100%,
And-
or 90% maybe. And so if 90% of your economy collapses,
Right? And people don't have anything to eat, and there's chaos in the streets, and what happens? The country collapses. It is entirely possible that the country dies.
because if our petrochemical just ceased to exist now, I think we would probably be on that verge of because vehicles couldn't move, trains couldn't move, you couldn't
Right.
move, you know.
And nobody's hands are shaped like this anymore because they don't know what a hoe is, right? So they can't go out and farm the old-fashioned way. Okay, so Pharaoh should find an intelligent, or back to the end, we read this. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. That's the point I was trying to make. This is going to be bad. And that's what Joseph warned me. He said, I'm not kidding when I tell you that 7 years is going to be bad. Okay? And so, I've got this temptation once again. So we've read our scriptures. Remember, it's been 2 years since the butler and the baker's dreams. Joseph was almost ready then. Remember, he told the butler, he said, remember me, right? That was 2 years ago. So certainly Joseph is just, the butler forgot me, right? And the butler did forget him. Butler forgot him for 2 years. It was only when something happened that he went, oh, hey, yeah, there was that Hebrew guy. Well, what was his name? Jimmy, John, Johnny, Jack, Joseph. Joseph, that was it. Joseph, right? Okay, so Joseph was almost ready then, but now he is fully ready. I want to look back at verse 16. Joseph's first words to Pharaoh. Okay? What were Joseph's first words for Pharaoh? To Pharaoh. It is beyond, Pharaoh said, I hear that when you're told a dream, you can interpret it. And what does he say? He said, it is beyond my power to do this. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Joseph is outside of the prison for the first time in years. Okay? He's gotten cleaned up. Right? Have you ever, some of you guys will understand, and maybe some of you ladies too, but I would never go so far as to say this to you. But some of you guys will understand. Have you ever, worked, been a hard day at work or something, and you come in and you keep going, man, something smells. Oh, it's me. Right? Have you ever? Show a hand. Don't be shy. Show a hand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He smelled like steel. Wait, what? But Joseph has been in prison, right? Baths don't come every day. They don't even come once a week. They don't come once a year. Right? He may have had one since he was in there. Prison is not a good existence, especially back in the day. Okay? And so Joseph says, it is beyond my power to do this. I want to point this out to you. How tempting would it have been to claim the glory? Right? Remember how he talked to the butler. Remember me when you get back in front of Pharaoh. Right? I want out. But here he is. He said, Pharaoh has practically handed this to him. I hear you can do this. How tempting would it have been to say, you bet. I can interpret a dream for a small price. Open the gate, look the other way, give me a horse, and I'm out of here. I'd give you eternity.
He wouldn't have been able to interpret it because God wouldn't have given him the knowledge to interpret it.
But I think what this, you're right. I think what this is, Joseph has completely and totally surrendered to God. My life is yours. That is an amazing place to be in. And I dare say that none of us have achieved that complete a surrender to the will of God. Okay? To claim this ability, he would have claimed it and leveraged it to get a release from prison, right? Sure, for the right price, I can, right? How tempting would that have been? Balaam, prophet that will be born here in a few chapters, right? Next book, Exodus. That's exactly how he made his living. Right? Yo, you want to hear from God? I can get a message from God for a price. Right? So, now he had been tempted before. How did he end up in prison? Right? He ended up in prison because of his resistance to temptation. But that was a physical temptation. this was way more seductive than that woman. Because this temptation was from his own ego. Right? Up here. Who are we in love with more than any other person on the face of the planet?
My wife.
Oh, Johnny, don't make us sick.
Go back out, come back in.
So I'll be suspending my lesson on Joseph. We're going to talk about honesty and lying.
Especially in the church, right?
That is the proper answer we're taught. But I'm going to tell you something. How does God, or how does the New Testament, how does God teach us to love our wives? As ourselves. No man hates his own body. Right? Love your wife like you love yourself. And so
maybe that's the problem. No, I'm serious. Maybe that's the problem.
That we love our wives like ourselves?
No, that we don't love ourselves properly.
We don't love our wives properly. We don't love anybody properly.
That's exactly right.
But that's what I'm saying. Here is the temptation of his ego. Your ego. You want me to ask the question again now that she's in here?
I got a just working class on that side.
She said,
So the ego is most tempting, right? How did Jones, the cult, Jonestown, right? Jim Jones, thank you. How did Jim Jones fall the way he did? Most of y'all don't even know who I'm talking about. It was ego. He was seduced by his own ego. Okay? And that's what we really have to be careful of. Joseph is demonstrating his total surrender to God. Now, he will not claim, no, I can't do it. God does it. God will do it. Okay? We see his humility, not I, but God, right? Let me ask y'all a question now, and I don't mean to be, I don't want to be hard on you. I just want I want to unwrap this a little bit. You know, somebody comes up and says, whatever it is that you do, okay, you do it. Maybe if it's a craft, you're a painter. Maybe you keep the books from somebody, and somebody comes up and says, "You are doing such a great job. You got a gift for that. You're just tremendous at this." And you say, "What? Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much." Right? No. If you were Joseph, right, you would say, it's not my ability. I'm blessed by God. Right? It's God's gift. And sometimes, even when we say that, when those words come out of our mouth, we're doing, hey, I want to prove how humble I am, so I'm going to give the credit to God so I can show just how righteous I really am. Thank you. Right? What is that? That's the same thing as going, thank you very much. That was all me, right? Because we're not sincere. Now, perhaps it's better than just overtly taking the credit. Were you stretching, or did you?
No, man. You didn't see my hand go up.
Yes, I did.
No, you didn't.
Don't gaslight me.
Sleeve.
I see all from up here.
Apparently not.
So, yeah, I'll wait till he falls asleep, and then we'll. So, we see his humility. Not I, but God, okay? After 13 years, our humanity would have seen this as our way out, right? We would have been like, oh, this is it. All I have to do is kind of say, yeah, that's me. I'm the great one. Don't put me back in prison, okay? Joseph refuses to take that credit. Instead, he chooses to serve, even if it means going back to prison. He has placed his fate completely in the hands of God. I point out to you the beginning of his advice, right? Remember I said he went a step further. He interpreted the dream, and then he said, so let Pharaoh find a wise and intelligent man to become a manager of all the land. Okay? He didn't say, hey, because I can talk to God, I'm a wise and he said, let Pharaoh find it. What does that signify? To me, what I see here is Joseph is giving honest, sincere advice. Not to benefit himself, but to benefit Pharaoh. And I think this comes across for Pharaoh. You're looking at me hard.
Yeah, I think also in a way that this is why he does it, try to send a message kind of, and I don't know how to put it in that, but send a message to him that, you know, maybe get him closer to the Father, to make the right decision.
You mean Pharaoh?
Yeah.
Possibly. But I think he's basically just accepting his fate, right? He said, hey, you know, I know what you're going to do. I'm a convict. I'm a foreigner and a convict. I'm a handy pet to have in prison, right? Y'all ever see Shawshank Redemption?
Have I?
I don't know. Have you?
It's a great movie. It's a
So what does Andy Dufresne say at one point, right? He's a bookkeeper, a banker, has an in-depth knowledge of the IRS tax code. He says, and I'm a handy pet to have, right? So Joseph has accepted that these people aren't going to, they don't owe me anything, right? And he's not going to try to leverage. He's left it all in God's hands. That's what I see here. Then he tells Pharaoh the meaning of skinny things eating fat things, okay, and remaining skinny. There will be 7 great record-breaking years, followed by 7 terrible record-breaking years. I mean, as good as the good years are toward the positive, the bad years are going to be toward the negative. Okay, so we see that, and then we see again Joseph's humility asserted. Right, he says in verse 33, he begins offering, like I said before, sincere advice. Pharaoh should find an intelligent and a wise man. I believe one of the things that impressed Pharaoh here is Joseph did not have an ulterior motive. He was sincere. He was true. Pharaoh, you need to find yourself a guy that you can trust. Right? I think Joseph, in his heart of hearts, is like, it's not me. Right? I'll go back to prison. And he's trusting completely in God. If Pharaoh's going to do him any favors, it's in God's hands, not in his hands. Right? Perhaps he's learned his lesson, you know, from trying to influence the butler to speak on his behalf. Maybe he's learned a lesson from that. Maybe he's just slowly come to the realization that I am a ship, God is the wind, He sends me where He wants me. Right? Job finally came to this realization. I'm in God's hands. You know, whatever God does is right because God does it. All right? And so, I mean, if you think about it, right, he could have said, I can fix this for you, right? He could have started to blow his own horn. After all, God talks to me. God's not talking to you. He's talking to me. Brother was like, I was like, oh, you were looking at, I was like, what are you got? Okay, so Pharaoh should find an intelligent man. I see this, like I said, almost a resignation. Pharaoh would never choose a convict. So I wonder, just a question, I like to wonder out loud. I wonder if when the butler said, hey, yeah, there's a kid in prison, I wonder if Pharaoh's the king, right? And Pharaoh's pretty astute, a pretty smart guy. So I wonder if he said, who is this guy? Find out his story and tell me before he shows up here, right? If he did a quick background check, give me a quick bio, give me a couple of paragraphs on this Joseph guy so I know what's coming in front of me. I don't find that to be unreasonable. Now, Scripture doesn't say he did that. It just says he called for him, okay? And so Joseph showed up. But one thing that was obvious here, whether or not Pharaoh checked up on Joseph's past, the brilliance of his plan was self-evident. 20% for 7 years, and you'll be able to survive the next 7. Okay? That is a brilliant plan. So collecting 20% of the record-breaking harvest for 7 years, you gather it, you store it, you guard it. Joseph warns that as good as the first 7 years are, the second 7 will be so bad nobody will remember. But I want to look a little deeper here, okay? I want to understand what's really going on. So let's look back. What was Pharaoh's description of the grain? Do you remember? I saw 7 fat, full heads of grain on one stalk. 7 heads per stalk, right? So what might that look like? So this is grain. Now, it says grain. So what we don't know is we don't know if it was corn or if it was wheat, bread grain. Okay? More than likely it was wheat, but it could have been corn. Wheat comes with 1 head per stalk. What was in the dream? 7 heads per stalk. Now, corn's a little bit different. Most times they come with 1, but they can come with 2. It's not unusual to see 2, but you never see 7. Now, I did a little bit of research here. 7 heads per stalk is what Pharaoh saw in his dream. And I think that's also indicative of the harvest. 7 times more than normal in a year. Right? So just to give you an idea, in the U.S., the wheat yield in 2024 was just over 50 bushels per acre. It's 51 point something. I'm going to round it back to 50 because we're going to do some math. Where did John go? Oh, John left already. Okay. I was going to say, keep somebody elbow John, keep him away. So we're going to do a little bit of math here, okay? So 50 bushels per acre. Y'all know what a bushel is? Right? A bushel basket. It's a big old basket about yay big around, about yay deep. Okay, that's a bushel basket. So you get 1 of those per acre. Now I don't know how many loaves of bread you can make out of that. I didn't go that far. Okay, but I just want to get, so you get 1 bushel per acre. All right, you with me? All right, or 50 bushels per acre. You get 50 of those per acre. So if we were to get 7 times, that would be 350 bushels per acre. Okay? Instead of 50, you'd get 350 if you had 7 heads per stalk. Okay? 20% of 350 is 70 bushels per acre. Okay? So every year, they got 70 bushels per acre. Now remember, they're getting 350 to do whatever they want to do with it. And Pharaoh steps in and he takes 70, 20%, and he stores it. And he stores per acre. Now I don't know how many acres they had. They had enough to keep the whole land of Egypt going. Okay? But 70 bushels per acre is what gets stored for 7 years.
And 490 bushels of season.
So Egypt would have a normal harvest plus some on top during the so in other words, if your normal was 50 bushels an acre and you stored 70 bushels an acre for 7 years, when the 7 bad years came along, you would have your 50 plus an additional 20 every year. So it would be like you were still farming. Now that's a huge amount of wheat in storage, right? And so it naturally, verses 47, and we're not going to get there, I don't think, but verses 47 through 49 say this: as predicted for 7 years, I'm skipping forward. The land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops that were grown in Egypt, stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on a seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. Now remember, all the numbers that we just talked about were per acre. You had 100 acres, you had 1,000 acres, you had 10,000 acres. How much grain are you putting in storage?
A lot.
A lot. Too much to count, right? So I want to bring this up because the scripture also says a little bit later on, during these famine years, people bought grain until there was no more money. They couldn't grow it, so they had to go back to Pharaoh to buy it. And they bought it until they run out of money. There was no money left in the economy. Right? Because these were farmers. So it wasn't like they were working for a printing press and they were getting paid by that guy. No, their income was farming. So there was no income. And they spent all the money they had saved. And they said, there's no money left. And Joseph said, well, bring me your livestock. Trade me livestock for grain. Right? And so, moms and dads looked at each other and said, what good is keeping the cow if we're going to starve to death? What are the kids going to eat? So they started bringing livestock in. And they did that until there were no more animals on the farms in the cities. That nobody had any animals. Nobody had any money. And Joseph said, okay, trade me your farms for wheat. And it ended up that Pharaoh ended up buying up the entire land. Scripture says this. He bought up the entire land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Now, some historians believe that Egypt was actually, the Egypt that we know today, right? If you look at a map, that Egypt goes right down, that was actually two countries at this time. There was the Upper Nile and the Lower Nile, right? The Blue Nile. There was the Arabesque Egypt, and then there was the African Egypt. And that this kingdom, because of this famine, they increased their land mass because people in the surrounding areas were coming in and handing over their family farms, their land, for wheat. And so the Pharaoh was able to increase the footprint of Egypt. Okay? Whatever the case is here, Egypt got filthy rich. I mean, they had it all. They had all. Remember, because we'll see this in the next chapter when we get there to study. People were coming from miles around. Joseph's family, unbeknownst to them that Joseph was still alive, traveled from where Israel is today down into Egypt to buy grain. They were coming from everywhere to buy grain. Remember, 50 bushels plus an extra 20 were stored every year. They had plenty. Right? Because you got to remember, in the economy, in a normal economy, you grow enough to feed yourself and to trade and sell off to get other things. Okay? So if you're on subsistence living, right, you're getting just what you need to live. There is no extra. So there was plenty. So they were selling it. They were selling it to everybody who showed up. Okay? And so why did God bless Egypt so much? Why does, sir?
Because of Joseph.
Because of Joseph, okay. But what? Yes, ma'am.
I believe that Joseph had the gift of wisdom.
Uh-huh.
And he had to have it supernatural so that he could stand out to Pharaoh to be looked at without questioning anything.
So you are right, and we will see that in some scriptures, that Joseph had unlimited power, okay? And he definitely had a gift of wisdom. I guess my question is more is more aimed at, why would God bless Egypt and not Canaan land where Isaac and Joseph's brothers were living?
So so that he could be reunited with his family.
Okay, that's not a bad answer. Why else might this have been happening?
Come on, genius.
Joseph was in Egypt.
Joseph was in Egypt. True. Okay, so let me help y'all out. I want you to think historically.
Is it because of Moses?
You're close.
The whole freeing
Who was there?
the Jewish slaves and all of that?
There you're on it. You're close. You can smell it. But you ain't seen the rabbit
Smell
yet.
the rocks cooking.
Because right now, Israel, Jacob, has 12 sons. Now, those sons have wives and they have sons, but it's still a very small, relatively speaking, set of relatives. That was a pun. Somebody giggled. Okay. Thank you, brother. Okay. What will they be when Moses leads them out?
Slaves.
They will be a nation. Okay? So because depending on, and I found this out to be true, this is just a little side note, there's quite a disagreement among theologians as to whether or not children of Israel were there 400 years or 250 years. They go back and forth as to what that actually means. But Scripture says they were in Egypt for 430 years. So if you're in Egypt for 430 years and you're going to bring a nation of over 2 million people out, what do you need?
A leader.
An economy. Right? You can't bring a nation of slaves who own nothing out into the desert. God knows this. Okay? A new nation would need an economy. They would need livestock, money, valuables, something to trade with on the trip to Promised Land, right? Something to live on. If they were slaves or, as many theologians believe, second-class citizens in Egypt, okay, they owned nothing or little of nothing. And so if you walk out with little or nothing, how long do you live? Not very long. Okay? I don't know your histories here, but if you have ever been truly and totally alone with no job and no prospects, you're living under a bridge. You're eating food out of a garbage can. Okay? And if you're doing that, who can you convince to give you a job? Right? Oh, I know I'm dirty now. Give me a job. I'll get cleaned up. I'll do. Yeah. Yeah. Okay? So God is already setting the pieces for the Exodus. Remember, that's how we started this discussion. Somebody wanted to look at an in-depth study of the Exodus. And I said, well, we got to start with Joseph. Right? And everybody's kind of looking at me like, how do we start with Joseph if we're going to study the Exodus? This is why, because the Exodus is the end of this story. All right? So if you're going to have a nation, you're going to need some wealth to jumpstart an economy. Right? And what do we learn? Exodus 12, I'm going to skip ahead here. Exodus 12, 35 and 36, the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing, articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked. So the Israelites stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. Right? What was it Hannibal Smith used to say on the A-Team? I love it when a plan comes together. Right? God planned this 400 some odd years before. He said, I've got to set Egypt up because I'm going to give it all to my son Israel. When he comes out of there, it's going to be back wages. It's going to be pain and suffering that they have caused them. And they're going to have the money and the wherewithal to start an economy nation size. Isn't that amazing? And so God started it all right here. This famine. Yeah, the famine served the purpose of bringing Joseph's family down and reuniting them, right? But one can also argue that that's the whole reason Joseph was separated from his family in the first place, to stage the family in Egypt so that they could come out of Egypt as a nation, and they didn't have to build an economy. There's no way you build that kind of an economy over 400 years, right? And so we see that they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. Okay, so let's keep going now. Back to current events, as it were. Genesis 41. We'll pick up the story in verse 37. As soon as I can. So Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours." Pharaoh has seen the wisdom in this plan. Okay? Pharaoh, I don't think the idea occurred to him, if I'm going to have 7 good years and 7 bad years, I better prepare. I can save my country by taking 20% of it in and storing it, right? He might have tried to take it all. Well, what happens if you try to take it all? People rise up. You can't take everything from me, right? And now you've got a rebellion on your hands, right? So 20%. That was a God-given number. 20% was something that, especially when you're making 7 times as much as you normally make, 20% isn't going to be noticed. Until finally Joseph had to say, I can't. I can see that conversation. Pharaoh has a cabinet meeting, right? Joseph shows up. He says, "Well, Joseph, how much grain do we got in storage now?" "I don't know. I can't count it. We've got so much. I've got grain in this city and in that city and over there and over yonder. And well, by the way, Pharaoh, if you go down into the basement, don't open that closet door because the grain's going to come flying out of it." He had it stuck everywhere. He couldn't count it, right? He couldn't count it. It was so much. And so Pharaoh also sees what? The humility in Joseph. Joseph wouldn't claim the gift or wouldn't claim the ability as his own. He said God did it. Joseph didn't petition. In other words, he didn't do a job. He wasn't on a job interview. He didn't apply for the job. He simply said, "You need to find somebody you can trust, and here's what they need to do," right? And Pharaoh's looking at that going, "Man, that's a good plan." Now, most kings, not all, there have been some that have been woefully inadequate, but most kings are a pretty good judge of nature, of character of people, right? And so Pharaoh's watching Joseph, and of course it doesn't hurt to have God whispering in the ear either, right? And he says, like, how many of y'all have ever seen Ben-Hur? You seen Ben-Hur?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's actually one of the best movies there is
About Jesus, right?
in the golden era of cinema.
Yeah. I thought for the longest time it was one of the best movies about Jesus because he was in it at the beginning and he was in it at the end, and they most of the movie was about Ben-Hur, so they couldn't mess Jesus up much. But in this movie, if you remember, Charlton Heston, our hero, is sent to prison because his sister knocks a tile off the roof and it hits the new governor of Judea just right and breaks his neck, and he falls off his horse and dies. Or it hits him just right and knocks him off his horse and he breaks his neck and dies. Either way, he died. And so they put Jesus. They put Ben-Hur on a ship and he's rowing, right? And that's his job. And they told him that. You exist to row this ship. And that is all. But the admiral, Ben-Hur was on the flagship with the admiral. And so the admiral got to talking to him. And he said there was something about him that he liked. And so they went into battle, and the ship was rammed by another ship, and it started to sink. and Ben-Hur was able to get out, right? He finds himself adrift, pulls himself up on some broken piece of ship, and there, drowning in the water, is the admiral. So Ben-Hur pulls him out of the water and saves his life. Right? Fast forward, they get rescued by Romans, right? And they carry him back, and the admiral, to show his appreciation, doesn't send him back down to the slave quarters, but introduces him to Caesar. And Caesar gives him a pardon. And the reason he gives him a pardon is in this phrase. He says, I find an incongruity, right? In other words, it's a strange paradox in a man who would kill my governor but save my admiral. Those two things don't line up. And so what Caesar was really saying is some part of the story is not being told about the governor's death, because I see here your character. This is what's going on in our story here tonight, right? Pharaoh is looking at Joseph. Now, like I said, maybe he's called back to the prison and said, hey, quick, give me a 2-paragraph biography of this guy. But what he sees in Joseph doesn't line up with the official reason why Joseph is in prison. And so Pharaoh's like, this guy has nobility in him. This guy has character in him. There's something missing out of this story. Now, remember who Joseph was a slave to when he first got there?
Mm-hmm.
Potiphar. Remember what Potiphar was? Captain of the guard. So he's running around in the palace somewhere while all this is going on. I imagine he's pinned back up against the wall being very, very quiet about this time. Because the man he accused of raping his wife is now speaking directly with Pharaoh. And they're not speaking as Pharaoh delivering orders. They're having a conversation. Okay? And so he's noted the humility in the man. Now, like I said, maybe Pharaoh's checked up on Joseph's history, or he simply notes the actions and demeanor of the man don't match the rap sheet, right? And finally, Pharaoh says, these ideas, and who was it that said he had the wisdom that come from God? Pharaoh recognizes that these ideas have to be divinely inspired, i.e., you're getting them from on high. Okay? So he appoints Joseph as second in command. Right? He says, only in the throne will you not outrank somebody. You'll outrank everybody but me. Right? That's basically what he's saying. So he is the prime minister, the grand vizier. Okay? Anybody ever watch Aladdin and the Blue Genie, right? The grand vizier, right? He ran. Pharaoh couldn't be bothered with this business. That's him. That's Joseph. He's the grand vizier. His word is law. Is superseded only by Pharaoh. Nobody says to Joseph, but wait. Only Pharaoh says, but wait. How many of y'all watching current events right now, watching the president and this guy that he's got standing next to him whispering in his ear named Elon? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So Elon is not appointed to any position, really, right? But yet, every time Elon opens his mouth, and those people who disagree with him go, well, you're not really anything official, what does the president do? The president says, oh, no, that's a good idea. He and I have discussed that. Wait, what? What? Okay. He asked everybody for an email. Right?
Like he said today, he said, whatever the president tells me to do, I do.
He sent out and said, everybody send an email. Tell me what you did last week. Oh, my gosh. They went bananas. The FBI said, we don't have to respond to that email. And NASA said, we don't have to respond to that email. And Homeland Security said, we're not responding to that email. And the deadline came and went, and President Trump said, I think that's a good idea. Everybody respond to that email. Now, all of a sudden, the emails are flying.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to have to justify what you do at work.
Yeah. What a terrible thing, right? Yeah, that's been the bane of my life for 30 years. I have to do a weekly report. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So his word is law. If Joseph says it, It will be done. Y'all remember the story of Moses, the Exodus? It's on my first slide every evening, right? Moses, Charlton Heston is standing there. You remember what Pharaoh's favorite phrase was when Yul Brynner was talking with Charlton Heston? So let it be written, so let it be done. Right?
Yeah.
This was Joseph. Okay? Now, again, you remember Potiphar. This is just something I think about as I'm reading this story, right? How do you think Potiphar feels? You know, he accused Joseph, and now Joseph's being named, chief in charge of everything. Right? And, but Joseph is humble. He is not vindictive. Okay? I'm going to try to get through the rest of this evening before we go. Joseph is humble. He's not vindictive. Okay? He's not going to press a grudge against Potiphar. Why? Because the Spirit of God is on him. And what do we have? The closer we get to God, what do we become like? Or we become more like? God. More like Jesus, right? Who do we forgive? Our enemies. Right? It's easy to forgive the ones we love, but we are supposed to forgive our enemies. Those who despitefully use us, who abuse us. We're supposed to pray for them. God bless them. Not bless his heart. Okay? A sincere request for blessing. Okay? All right? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, now remember, he's putting him in charge of everything. He's just said, only in the throne will I outrank you. Right? But he keeps going. Pharaoh is driving the point home. He says, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. He is Secretary of the Interior. Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen. Right? There's he had on good clothes. Joseph is thinking, man, I got me a new suit out of this deal at least. And now he's getting dressed in the finest. It's a Brooks Brothers suit. You never heard of that? You can go to J.C. Penney's, or you could go to J.C. Penney's, and you could buy a really good suit for $500. Or you could go to Brooks Brothers and buy a suit for $5,000. Probably higher than that now. Okay? Joseph has just stepped from that Men's Warehouse suit up to a Brooks Brothers tailored set of clothes. Oh, he's a Buster Brown suit. Granimals. Got to have granimals so I know what tie to wear with what shirt. All right. Pharaoh removed the ring from his hand, placed it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in fine linen clothing, hung a gold chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride the chariot reserved for his second in command, and wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. Joseph ain't had that kind of attention since he got to Egypt. Somebody running in front of him going, Joseph is coming, on your knee. Wow. Okay? So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt, and Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh. I am king. Right? But no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval.
Dang.
If it's going to be done, you better come ask Joseph leave to go and do it. But you know what? When Joseph got to Potiphar's house, Potiphar said, whatever happens in my house, you do it. And then he got to prison, a little bit larger institution. And nothing happened in the prison that Joseph didn't say get done. And now Joseph has gone from household to institution to nation. Okay? Same thing, hand and foot, right? All right, so now the detail of his authority and preeminence are prescribed. There's a ring on his finger, the best clothing, to put it into common vernacular, a private limo.
Chariot.
Well, that's true. It's a chariot. But I was kind of modernizing it just for you.
Zingers.
And a requirement to kneel before Joseph wherever he went. Anything to be done must have Joseph's approval. I want you to take note of Joseph's age. He is 30. He is 30. I'm going to draw some parallels, some comparisons. I want you to remember this. He was 30. Okay? This will be a little bit later. It's not going to be tonight. but I'm going to draw some interesting comparisons. All right. And so Pharaoh gave Joseph a new name, Zaphaniah Paneah. It means God keeps him, or God gave him life. He also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. This is a very prestigious thing, by the way. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. I want you to note, Joseph went right to work. Okay? So, in summary, so Joseph looked like an Egyptian now. Right? He was shaved, wearing Egyptian dress. He looked like an Egyptian. He dressed like an Egyptian. He was named like an Egyptian. Right? If I could have figured out how to put the song in here and play the song while they were, walk like an Egyptian.
I was about to find it on my phone.
Did he walk like
Now, there's some debate about the name, Zaphaniah Paneah, but it basically means the God said, let him live. And I find that strangely appropriate for Joseph, because Joseph has been conspired against by his brothers, but God said, let him live. He was sold into slavery, but God said, let him live. He was accused of rape and thrown into prison, but God said, let him live. I think Pharaoh had more on the ball than just being some dumb king, okay? And he's given a wife from a prestigious upper-class family. So I want you to think a supermodel with a recognizable family name and reputation, right? I mean, Joseph's kid right out of prison, all of a sudden he's got supermodel wife from one of the most respected families in Egypt, and he goes immediately and he's like, okay, I'm on it, Pharaoh, and he begins to do the job Pharaoh's called him to do without any delay. Okay, so that is. We see Joseph go from son to servant to prisoner to Pharaoh, or Pharaoh, vice Pharaoh, second in command Pharaoh, and the next part of the story is going to get real interesting. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Who's asking? What? What? Huh? Oh yeah. He's going to get 2 sons.
His wife